Hello again, camera. It is me, W. Hansen, again also known as Wanson. Um, my usual mask, part of it is in my trunk because we're using it for a film we are making over on my other channel, Hansen Bros. Check that out. I think I've advertised that channel here on this channel like once, but whatever. So I have not yet covered the show Stranger Things on this channel, or I don't think I've even mentioned it, but it is my favorite show of all time. And the series finale just came out recently, and I saw it in theaters with my family and one of my close friends. It was a very great experience. I wanted to just come on here and do what I haven't done in a while on this channel and just offer a regular review. Just a review of the season. First of all, spoiler warning if you haven't seen the full season, get out of here. What are you doing? Unless you don't care about spoilers, that happens. Um, Sorry, my notes are over there, so I'm going to keep looking over there. So, my thoughts here are going to be sort of kind of scattershot. Like, I'm going to talk about both the finale itself as well as season 5 as a whole. And I'm not really going to go in like chronological order, so I'm kind of just going through some just my thoughts on individual parts of the finale and season 5. And then at the very end, I am going to just do a quick ranking of the seasons as my opinions stand right now. Mostly gut reactions, just as a little bonus for the end, and then we'll be done. So, before we get into it, as usual, as is routine now, we're going to have my beautiful intro I made. My first thought about the season, again, these are scattershot. Great character development, especially on the part of Steve and Dustin. Those two have been my favorite duo in the entire show for a very long time. They're two of my favorite characters. I think I have like three favorite characters. Those two are two of them. The third is Hopper. I thought it was pretty unreasonable the way a lot of people were complaining this season, like, oh, Dustin's moody. Like, obviously he's moody. He was a freshman in high school when he watched his mentor figure die in his arms. So, yeah, he's going to be a little moody. And I thought his arc made a lot of sense. My phone turned off. I need to refresh my notes. And I thought the way Steve reacted to it, it wasn't always, the best way a person could react when their friend is going through something. But I thought it was very in character for Steve. Like, obviously he cares a lot about Dustin, but he's never been the most like emotionally adept of the group. He's able to give Dustin like girl advice, and he's able to be there for him, but he's never been super like emotionally receptive. That's just not really his character. He's a lot more like practical. And so I thought the way he reacted to Dustin's behavior made a lot of sense. And then it was very satisfying when the two eventually reconciled and became besties again. And Steve's ending with being a baseball coach, that was just perfect ending for his character. I love Steve. I liked everyone else's character development. Some standouts were Will, Hopper a little bit. I feel like he didn't get a ton of attention this season. Holly, Max, Nancy and Jonathan. Look, so the thing about Nancy and Jonathan, when I first saw their breakup, I hit my hat. This is a Dustin hat, by the way. If you didn't notice that, their breakup scene was. A lot of people in the internet have already said this. I did not interpret that as a breakup scene. I interpreted it more as like, oh, we recognize we're not going to get married. There are too many problems in our relationship that we need to work through. Just sort of airing it all out. But I felt like it was never explicitly clear that that was a breakup for the two of them. I've seen at least one person on the internet complain that it's a lack of media literacy that is letting a lot of people misinterpret that scene. Like, they're going like, man, people are just losing their media literacy these days because they couldn't tell that was a breakup scene. Which I agree the loss of media literacy is a serious problem, but I don't think that scene was an example of that, because I personally, at least I like to think I'm generally reasonably media literate, at least more media literate than the people who thought Dune Part 2 was pro-life. But I still misinterpreted that scene, and I just thought the writing could have been just a tad more clear, that like about the finality of like that was a breakup scene. Um, but yeah, that was the only part of the season I think I like misinterpreted or thought could be clearer. Otherwise, I thought all the character development was good. So next point I have written down here is about the visuals of this season. So I've seen a lot of people complain about the visuals this season and how a lot of it looks a bit cheaper. There are some like silly mistakes, like there was the Holly Under Armour being visible, the part of Vecna's mind with like the red and the spikes and stuff that lead to like when you're escaping his mind. I thought that did look a lot cheaper than it looked in season 4, and I'm not sure what the source of that was. It didn't really detract from my enjoyment, but it was noticeable to me. There were also several shots that were like very obviously in front of a green screen. I think even one of the shots where Max was describing to Holly her initial journey through Vecna's mind, and when she first appeared in that high school hallway, when Shaboom started playing, and it was like Joyce in high school and all that, when she first appeared in that hallway, that was clearly a green screen shot, and I don't know what happened there, but those are sort of the only complaints I have about the visuals, though. I want to at least maybe take into consideration that the scale of this season was bigger than any of the previous seasons, and being on a TV budget might have at least hampered that a little bit. So that might not be true. It could have been a massive budget, and in that case, I don't know what was off with the visuals, but all the other visuals were astounding, as always, especially the Mind Flayer at the end, Dimension X, like, those little flaws in the visuals, they didn't detract from my enjoyment at all. They're just things I wanted to point out. Next point, this is something I have also seen people talk about. A lot of these are. But that is a lack of tension in the narrative leading up to the finale. Stakes have been a big thing of contention this season. People have been talking about, like, oh, there's no stakes because they refuse to kill anyone off. And while I partially agree with that, I also don't think killing characters off is, like, essential. I would have at least wanted them to, like, maybe kill Ted, at least. Like, if they did nothing with Ted in the end, so he could have at least died when a Demogorgon flung him across a room and scratched him. I thought that was pretty unreasonable that he survived. Other than Ted, and maybe Karen, I think if Karen had died, that would have been okay, but it was also nice to get her hero moment towards the end of the season, so that sort of evens out. I think characters dying isn't what creates stakes, at least not all the time. Because I feel like people compare this season a lot to season 4 and say season 4 had way more stakes. But back when season 4 came out, people were also complaining during that era that there were no stakes and the characters had way too much plot armor. So I think it's just a continuing problem with Stranger Things, and people are just, now that it's the finale, that it feels like there's a bigger need to kill off characters, which is a reasonable thing to want, I think. You want to feel like there's a lot of danger on the horizon if it's the final season. But the fact that no one super important died, I think, like, that didn't ruin the show for me. But I do think there was a lack of just, like, urgency leading up to the finale. Like, you're hearing, like, Vecna is gonna crash the Abyss or Dimension X or whatever into the real world, and that, like, the world is literally going to be destroyed instantly. And I just feel like maybe they just made the stakes too big, because that's just not really something, if you want to focus on the characters, which this show did, you just can't really feel the stakes of something so big as another world is going to crash into ours. Like, that's just not something you can really fathom. And so as a result of that, there isn't a ton of urgency leading up into the finale, as opposed to season 4 where you had the, like, scene with separate ways playing, and it felt like everything was just like, to quote Sean Chandler. I like Sean Chandler. He was like it was ratcheting up the tension in a way that season 5 just didn't, and that's especially a problem when people keep, again to quote Sean Chandler, people just keep pausing to talk. As a result of the aforementioned them not killing off enough characters, there were a lot of characters in this season, especially at the end when they all reunited. There was like 20 people, including like Mr. Clark, Vicky, people that were never really involved before. And I like seeing those people involved, especially Mr. Clark. So I like the fact that there's so many characters. It can feel overcrowded, but I feel like it's not. It didn't feel like a huge deal to me when I was actually watching, because a lot of them are pretty minor characters, so they don't require a ton of attention by the story. They can just be there and do their little thing. And if I had to pick characters that I didn't want to be involved, like I would have kind of a hard time doing that, because I liked having Mr. Clark around. I liked having Vicky around even. I mean, you could not have her around, but then how else, like, would you just break up with Robin? Would you never know what was going on, you know? It just felt like those characters at least all had a reason to be there. So it wasn't a huge deal to me when I was watching, especially because there are movies like Avengers Infinity War that have like 70 characters, and people didn't really complain. Again, those had like movies and movies of build up, so it is a bit of a different situation, but I think the amount of characters, it didn't bother me a ton, even if I was able to point it out and be like, it's a little funky how many characters are in this show. Next point, quick point, the dialogue. A lot of people, I should say a lot of people have been complaining about the writing this season, and in particular the dialogue and the acting. I think the dialogue at times felt a little bit awkward this season. It felt a bit more like almost Godzilla versus Kong-esque, like a bit too overdramatic and expository. But it wasn't like a huge shift. It was like from here to here, I felt. Because Stranger Things has always had a bit dramatic and expository dialogue. And that's just kind of something you get acclimated to when you watch the show. So I didn't mind it a ton. But it did make it a bit awkward to watch, especially in Volume 1, I think it had the dialogue problem, and then Volume 2 in the finale, it didn't really, it felt more par for the course in those. But Volume 1, there was a bit of, the dialogue did feel a bit stilted at times. But again, not a huge issue. And a lot of people have been complaining about the acting, especially by the main cast of, like, the people who were kids in Season 1 and have now grown up. In particular, Noah Schnapp, which, like, I just don't get the complaints about the acting. Like, especially directed to Noah Schnapp, I see his performance in the show, and, like, as someone who has acted in many, many things myself, whether it be theater or short films or anything like that, I see his performance, and I see people complain about it, and I'm like, what other facial expression do you want him to make in the scene? What other tone of voice do you want him to make in the scene? Like, I would need you to explain that to me in order to justify that much criticism over his performance. Because in my opinion, it just felt like a normal good performance, especially in the really emotional moments. Like, he killed it, I think. He did a really good job. And I think it's almost this, like, cognitive, like, disconnect, like something is wrong feeling, almost, when Will is talking a lot, because, first of all, Noah Schnapp looks like a completely different person as Will than when he looked in the first 3 seasons. Like, between seasons 3 and 4, his bowl cut got smaller, and he grew a ton, and his face got way more adult looking. And then between 4 and 5, they got rid of the mushroom on his head and improved his hair. So he just looks and feels like a completely different individual. And I don't think that's a fault of the show. I think it's just the fact that that's just how he grew physically. And his voice is way different too now. And I think because Will barely talked in the first 3 seasons, and not that much in season 4 either, seeing him have such a big role with dialogue and performance this season, it's almost like not uncanny valley, but it just creates this sort of response in your brain where it's like, this just feels off, you know? At least that's how I interpreted why people are saying that Noah feels awkward in a lot of his dialogue scenes. People have also been criticizing Millie Bobby Brown's performance a lot. I think she just didn't really have a ton to work with this season. Like Eleven's always been um pretty, her expression doesn't change a ton, and it only does when she gets really emotional, and there weren't as many moments this season where she could get really emotional. So I don't think it's fault of Millie Bobby Brown. Um yeah, performances, writing, all that was cool with me this season. Dialogue, you know. I think people are being a little harsh. You know, I'm not trying to discount any criticism. Just from my perspective, it just feels a little harsh. A little harsh, you know? Anyway, I'm at 20 minutes, Jesus. Okay, I'll speed through a lot of my next points. Action this season was great, especially the final battles, with all the weapons, the Mind Flare, the Demogorgons earlier in the season. I don't know where on earth the Demogorgons went during the finale, but before, at least, they did some really cool stuff. I thought the way they handled Vecna and the Mind Flare, it had this almost like Lovecraftian, like Cthulhu-esque sense to it when they're in Dimension X. Like, I thought Vecna just feels like this really, like, powerful, almost like eldritch looking monster, especially that especially goes for the Mind Flare too. So that was cool. What's my next note? Okay, the military plot line with Dr. K. I felt like that was a bit underdeveloped, not just because, like, I get the whole thing with the pregnant women and how they're trying to use 11 and 8's blood, Kali's blood, to create more Henrys and more superpowered children. I got that part, but every time Dr. K would talk about finding the girl and saying everything that's happening right now is happening because of that girl, it was a little, the perspective of K in the military felt a little confusing to me, because back in season 4, Sullivan, the mean military guy who in this season it's revealed he's under Dr. K, he was blaming 11 for Vecna's killings. But in this season, Vecna is revealed and kills a bunch of military guys. Like, the Upside Down is clearly, it's open and the military's quarantining it. So when Dr. K says stuff about, like, everything that's happening right now is happening because of that girl, like, I don't know how much context or information she has about the lore and the events of the previous seasons, or 11's role in all of it. Like, I get that she wants 11 and Kali's blood to make more superpowered children, but I don't really get her perspective beyond that. So yeah, certain characters are missing and or sidelined in this season. Some of them I didn't mind, some of them I minded. I'm like, where on earth is that character? But I also understood that they had a lot to juggle already with this season, and so those characters being ignored wasn't a huge problem. But those characters include Dr. Owens. Dr. Owens is one that I did really mind. Like, I really wanted them to at least check up on him, or at least confirm he's dead, if he is dead, if he died, and if Sullivan killed him in season 4 when he was handcuffed. Because there was just no acknowledgement of him, and he was a really important character before. Argyle, I get why they didn't include him in this season. He wouldn't have really fit with the vibe of things. And Jonathan's not getting high anymore, so I'm not sure what role he would have had, but at least acknowledge Argyle's existence, because I miss Argyle. I love Argyle. Susie, I know Susie got banned from all her devices in season 4, so that would explain why her and Dustin aren't together anymore, because it was clear by the finale that her and Dustin aren't together anymore. But they didn't really acknowledge it at all, so I would have liked at least a little acknowledgement on that part. There were parts where I felt 11 Hopper's storyline was very sidelined, but they sort of brought it back to the forefront in the end, so that's okay with me. Next set of notes here. Derek, great character. Holly, great character. Love them both. Delightful Derek, one of my new favorite characters on the show. I loved especially that he's besties with Steve by the end. That fits so well, and it made me so happy. And that he and Holly and their friend group are the next D&G generation. That was great. Um, okay, moving to my biggest criticism of the season. And by this, I mean the criticism that I personally thought of myself when watching volumes 1 and 2 for the first time before I looked on the internet and saw a lot of other people's criticisms. Like, this is the big criticism I had with the season by myself. And that is the events feel very scattershot. And I think with season 4, the storylines were very scattered and there was a lot going on separately, but it felt like more like clean separations because you have the events here in Hawkins, the events here in California, and the events here in Russia. And um, this season, they're all in Hawkins, which is a good thing because it keeps things focused. But it feels like characters are really jumping around from place to place a lot, and the events feel not convoluted, but it just feels like, oh, whoa, this is happening now, though. This is happening. This is happening. And it can feel kind of overwhelming as a result. I thought it really came to a peak in Volume 2, where it's like Will is saving Max and Holly from Vecna inside Camazotz. And then over here, all of a sudden, Dustin finds out that the Upside Down is a wormhole. And it's like, oh my god. Like, there's so much happening separately, and the characters don't find out about these things until the very end. And then, like, the next episode, it's like Will's unconscious, and Vecna's using him to spy. And it's like, oh, whoa, now they suddenly have to save Max, and saving Max is the main objective. But there's still some stuff going on over here with Dustin, Steve, Nancy, and Jonathan. So it's like, yeah, it just felt it didn't feel like the events of the season were laid out as cleanly. It didn't feel as streamlined as the previous seasons, even though those seasons also had a lot of plot lines and a lot of lore also building up at once. So yeah. Next note. I really love the stuff with Vecna's character in the finale and how he was like possessed by the Mind Flayer as a child, but like he's beyond redemption and he's like choosing to side with the Mind Flayer. But there's still this sense of like you can't tell how much agency he has over his actions, so like he needs to be taken out. But it almost still feels tragic at the end. And I loved, Joyce the F-bomb and chopping Vecna's head off at the end, but I do wish there was at least a little bit more reflection on the part of the characters, or at least reflection on the part of Will when he found out that Henry, his life, might have been more tragic than they had previously thought. And like, he found out that this he was a kid and he was possessed by the Mind Flayer, and there's really no telling if he had any control over his actions or not. Even though he said he chose the Mind Flayer, he chose not to resist. That could have just been the influence infiltrating his mind. So we really don't know how much control he had over his actions, and that makes his eventual death pretty sad if he didn't have any control, even though he obviously had to be taken out. So I feel like the characters didn't really reflect on that in the end at all, and I would have at least liked a hint of that. Not a ton of it, and I don't want to remove Joyce chopping his head off, but still, that I had that thought. The finale, the final battle with the Mind Flayer, a lot of people have said that was too short and too easy. I somewhat agree. I felt like they could have extended it by like 10-20 minutes, maybe. Made it just a little longer, made it a little more difficult, gave Vecna a bit more to do. And I really wish Will had used his powers more in the final battle. He used them like once to find out Vecna's backstory, and a second time to chop his arm off and save Eleven, which is very important. But I feel like with all the buildup from his powers, and how they were kind of building him up to be a super important player in the finale, he could have used his powers a bit more, and that would have been a benefit of extending the final battle 10 to 20 minutes. Moving on to the epilogue. I pretty much no complaints about. It was all fantastic, super emotional. I really found the emotion hitting me at Mike and Hopper's conversation, which it's not one of the more obviously emotional scenes in the episode, so that kind of surprised me. But I feel like it's at that point where Hopper is talking to Mike about Eleven's choice, where it really hit me just in my chest and in my eyes, like, oh, this is the end. And Mike and Hopper are going to live forever with the fact that Eleven chose to die. Or at least we find out later that she might not have, but still. Like, it just really hit me at that moment. And, like, Dustin's valedictorian speech, just everything in that epilogue. Wonderful. I don't want to go through it all too much. My throat hurts, but yeah. Eleven's, okay, as I mentioned just now, Eleven's death or lack thereof, there are, either way, there are issues. Because if Eleven is dead, it added some much needed stakes for the characters in the finale. And, like, if Eleven did die at the end, that would have provided a bit more, like, this was an important, dangerous situation they were in and wouldn't have felt as safe. And so I think that the providing of stakes was needed. But if 11 is dead, I think that's a really bad ending for her character. Like, again, with, like, they acknowledge that in Hopper's speech. He's like, you have been tortured your entire life. Like, you deserve to... I had a lump in my throat. You deserve to have a life after this, to have a life beyond being hunted by the military and the Upside Down and Vecna. Like, she just deserves a normal life. And I feel like her making that choice to kill herself in the end, it's really sad for her, especially looking back at the previous seasons. And I feel like it doesn't send a great message about suicide. Like, Hopper's like, this whole episode is about Hopper learning to accept 11 and let her go and let her make the right choice, as she puts it. But then when Hopper lets her go and makes her choice, she commits suicide. And that's a really muddled message. But if 11 is alive, as Mike theorizes later, I like that they left it open-ended, and if 11 is alive, that is a much better ending for her character while still keeping that, like, bitter sweetness that she can never see her friends or Hopper again. But it does make it feel a bit more safe and like a cop-out that, you know, only Kali was the main character who died. But I would rather believe 11 is alive. I feel like the pros of that scenario outweigh the cons. So yeah. Okay, I had one more note, which I wrote verbatim as, did the Duffers forget Max and Elle were close friends? Because it feels like they barely interacted this season. Like, when Max came back to life, 11 was like, oh my god, it's really you. That's it. And then 11 dies, and I feel like Max didn't get a ton of attention for that, even though she and 11 were, like, absolute besties in Season 3. And in Season 4, even though they were separated. They were still thinking about each other a lot. So, yeah, that's more minor complaint than my previous one, but yeah, overall, I did have a very positive impression of this season, especially the finale. I thought, despite its flaws, it was a very satisfying send-off, especially in the epilogue. And overall, I didn't have a ton of issues with this season. And the last thing I wanted to talk about before I rank the seasons overall, just briefly, is like the discourse around this season is really depressing to me. Like, I'm not trying to discount people having criticisms of this show and this season and the direction it went, but a lot of it feels like either it's like what's happening to, like, all fandoms, Marvel, Star Wars. It feels like a lot of the criticism is not just, like, reasonable criticism, but it's either people just being really mean-spirited, giving, like, personally attacking people who do like the show, and then complaining when those people get mad that oh, you're interpreting it as a personal attack, just let me have my opinion. No, you're the one being a jackass here. So, yeah, a lot of it just feels like really biting, like with Star Wars and Marvel fandoms, people just being really angry and harsh on the internet. And a lot of it, like, people honestly being really ungrateful. Like, people are like, oh, we waited 3 years for this. Like, never let I've seen, like, some Byler fans go, like, because Byler didn't happen, they're like, never let the Duffers write a show again. Like, they created this show that you're so obsessed with. Show some gratitude here. Like, people don't realize how much work goes into fictional productions of this scale. And you can hate the way the story turned out, but you don't want to just discount that work. And that's my problem with so much criticism over film and TV on the internet. And it's why when I watch film criticism, I typically like to stick to channels that are more like nuanced. They look at both the good and the bad, even if there's very little good. They at least show a little bit of grace. And the other side of it is the review bombing, people just getting super unreasonably mad, especially at episode 7 for obvious reasons. Will's coming out scene. It's like usually the thing I like to complain about is that now this fandom's getting hit by the anti-social justice grifter people who are like, oh, they're bringing the woke gay agenda into Stranger Things. They're making Stranger Things gay. They're shoehorning modern ideologies into, like, Will was always gay, guys. You're being idiots. Even Elon Musk spoke out, like, Elon Musk was complaining about them forcing Will being gay into, like, shut the hell up, Elon Musk. You do not deserve to be talking about Stranger Things. That's what I usually like to complain about with fandoms. But on the other side, there's another side of this, and it's the Byler fans, because the Byler fans, when Will and Mike didn't get together, I thought it was fairly clear that it wasn't going to happen. I mean, my close friend I saw the finale with was a Byler fan, so like I don't have a problem if you were into that as a theory. But if because Byler didn't happen, a lot of them now you're like getting super mad and review bombing the series. Like, it's okay that it didn't happen. You don't need to frame your entire perspective on the show on this one ship. I thought it was at least very clear it wasn't going to happen. I feel like the people who were saying that Mike was showing signs of internalized homophobia and Will was, like, clearly in love with Mike, I thought a lot of that was seeing things that weren't really there. I never thought it was clear that Will loved Mike. I thought at minimum it was a crush that he was showing, and like confusion about those feelings that he was dealing with. So yeah, I tried not to let a lot of the discourse get to me a ton just because of how unpleasant it can be, but I've also seen a lot of respectful, reasonable discussion on this season between people, so it's not all bad. But yeah, moving on from that, now that I've said all my thoughts about this season and the finale, at least all the thoughts that I wrote down, I would like to offer my little ending bonus and rank the seasons. At least how I feel right now. This could definitely change since season 5 literally just ended. But in 5th place, last place, I would put season 3. I love season 3, a lot of it. I just felt like the plot line with the Mind Flayer turning people into flesh goo and building itself a physical form. The big giant Mind Flayer monster, that was probably my least favorite of the final things that the characters fight at the end of every season. I thought the giant flesh spider monster was my least favorite of those. And also the vibe of season 3 is just really different. Everyone's clothes are way more colorful. It's way more consumerist. They bring the Russians into it. So yeah, it just feels a bit of a black sheep of the show in terms of just aesthetic. And Hopper goes insane. So yeah, in 4th place, after season 3, above that I have season 5. This season. This could go up or down depending on how well I sit with it when I rewatch it. But I don't need to explain my thoughts in this season more. Just above that, season 2. I considered putting it below season 5, but I think season 2 had an overall more coherent story. And it was also the first Dustin and Steve season, so that really bumps it up. After that, I have, in 2nd place, season 4. First Vecna season. I thought everything in it was very well done, especially the Massacre at Hawkins Lab, Dear Billy, the finale. Those episodes were some of the best episodes of the show. We're really attached to all the characters by that point. There are a lot of flaws with the season 2, which is why it's not number 1. Mike does nothing except whine about Eleven. Sometimes the California and Russia plot lines feel a bit you want to get back to the main Hawkins plotline, but those are minor complaints. I really like season 4. It's definitely the darkest season with all the Vecna kills and stuff, so yeah. First place, season 1, I think it just builds this layer of, oh god, I'm losing my voice. These layers of intrigue. It has such a momentum to it, and such a, like, this depth to the way it's written. I feel like you just can't replace it with more seasons. So, season 1, number 1. That is my full review of Stranger Things Season 5 and the series finale. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you watched it all the way through, I hope you enjoyed. Hope you have a great day. Hope you had a great New Year's. And I will see you. I have talked way too much. I'll see you in the next video. Bye. Bye.
Ladies, I'm an escalator. Going upstairs, so see you later.